DSS touches, in some extent, 1 in every 6 South Carolinians. Right?
Wow.
1 in 6 is receiving assistance from some program, not just the child welfare, but all of the programs. I think the general public probably has no ideas about all these services that are being provided to families and youth.
Hi, and welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here is our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to the Miracles from the Hill podcast. I'm Ryan. I'm your host. We are deep in the trenches of season 3, which is all about the experience of homelessness for children. If you'd like to hear more than this podcast, certainly pause, leave a review, follow the podcast itself so you can get access to new content. And we'd certainly like to know what you think. So you can email us at podcast@miraclehill.org. Man, I am stumbling over my words this morning.
You're fine.
We are blessed to have Jocelyn Gibson with us this morning. Good morning, Jocelyn.
Good morning.
So Jocelyn is the Placement Services Director at the South Carolina Department of Social Services, DSS. She has a BA in sociology from Clemson, 18 years of experience with a variety of different roles in the child welfare world. And so I'm hoping that through our time today, people will come to understand DSS better, understand how organizations like Miracle Hill, a CPA, maybe we'll even tell them what that stands for, how we work with DSS. And I want to start off by just saying thank you for doing what you do for DSS and the partnership we've shared for many, many years at this point. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you. I also thank y'all so much for allowing me to come and for the partnership we've enjoyed with y'all for many, many years.
So we always dig just a hair into somebody's story when they come on. So how in the world you wind up with DSS?
Well, I am actually, I guess what you could call a second generation DSS employee. Growing up, my mother was, her career was also in child welfare with the Department of Social Services. So it's what I saw her doing. It's when I learned of, the importance of that work and how it can make an impact in the lives of children and families. And started as an intern while I was in college, and I've been in this field ever since.
So Mom gave you the example,
Yeah.
but talk about how you developed your own passion for the work.
Sure. I guess I would say it was when I was an intern. I thought that I was... I assumed that would be my field, but of course, until you've actually graduated and got out there in the professional workforce, you're a little bit unsure. When I was interning with DSS in the child welfare field, I interned in the same county and city that I've lived in my whole entire life, but being able to see parts of our community I had no idea existed, and seeing some of the situations that children were living in that I had been very much sheltered from, I realized that that's what I wanted to do, was be a part of the system that was strengthening families and ensuring child safety.
So the internship opened your eyes
it
to a
did.
whole new side of society.
It did. That's the perfect way to word it. Even though the places I was going maybe 2 or 3 miles from places I'd been going my whole life, you travel a little bit into different neighborhoods and you can see some of the challenges that people in the community are experiencing.
So as you and I both know, this can be very challenging. So on the Miracle Hill side, I often tell our new staff members that this will be the most challenging / amazing job that you'll ever have. So when the days are challenging and long and hard and you're seeing the brokenness of the world, what keeps you going?
Well, in my world, in my current role, obviously I'm focused on, our role is to locate placements for children who are in foster care, and it's very challenging due to our lack of resources. But what keeps you going? What keeps me going is being able to see the times that really it all comes together. We've been working on a youth who really needs stability, and we just have been struggling to find it. But when we are actually able to achieve it and see a wonderful outcome, it keeps me going. And being able to see my staff also celebrating in that.
Okay, so let's jump into an education for our listeners. So I'm going to start at 100,000 feet. What is the South Carolina Department of Social Services?
Well, the South Carolina Department of Social Services is the agency that has programs related to child welfare, economic services, adult advocacy, and child support services. So, of course, it's an overarching agency that works to strengthen families and children.
Okay, so let's kind of walk through all that South Carolina DSS does. So why don't you just pick one and talk about it and pick the next one?
Yeah. So we can start with economic services, which South Carolina Department of Social Services administers the SNAP program, which has formerly been known as food stamps, which provides eligible and low-income household with nutrition assistance by increasing their food purchasing power. Also, DSS is the administrator for the TANF program, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, and it's basically South Carolina's welfare program, which provides temporary financial assistance to needy families with dependent children who meet federal eligibility guidelines. The economic services programs touch a great many families in the community, especially during COVID.
Sure.
That was a really important safety net for families. And also along with our economic services programs come work programs, employment training and job search assistance for people who are receiving the economic services benefits to assist them towards eventually perhaps no longer needing those benefits through expanding their job opportunities. We also administer the Child Welfare Program in South Carolina, which includes Child Protective Services, which in the CPS, we call it CPS, that is the division that investigates reports of suspected child abuse and neglect by parents, guardians, and caregivers, and foster care and adoption, which is how children who cannot safely remain in their family of origin while DSS provides services to the families. They are placed in the legal custody of DSS to be a licensed foster home or group care facility. Also now heavily in kinship families, even while in DSS custody.
All right, tell people what kinship is.
Yeah, so kinship is absolutely wonderful and the best setting for youth who are in DSS custody, cannot be legally returned at that time to the custody of their family of origin. We now are able to license kin or fictive kin. Kin would be related by blood, marriage, adoption. Fictive kin would also be church members of the youth, friends, neighbors, coaches, teachers, absolutely. And it is a way for that family to receive all the benefits of a foster family, which includes the monthly stipend, which is very important. And there's certain non-safety things we're able to waive for a kin or fictive kin to become licensed, to smooth that pathway and encourage the ability for youth to live in those settings. We have just really drastically increased the amount of children who are in DSS custody and are living in kinship settings since we rolled out the big implementation of kinship foster family licensing. It's been right at about 3 years.
All right, so
since that.
to put it in layman's terms for our
Sure.
listeners, so a child is being pulled from their home for a variety of different reasons,
Right.
but instead of increasing the trauma by sending them to a stranger's house, really good people who are
Right.
foster families, but a stranger's house nonetheless, they're able to go to a relative's house or somebody that they're close with, so that the relationship's not, or their general life relationships aren't broken.
Correct.
They stay in the same area with the
Correct.
same people around them. So it's really a secondary best case scenario. Can't be home,
That's
but you're as
correct.
close to home as you can get.
That's correct, because kinship is also a diversion for youth who are involved in a investigation phase with DSS, or where the agency is working with the biological family closely, and it appears that reunification, the returning of the child back there, will be imminent. But when that is not able to be achieved, where it doesn't look like the youth is going to go back to family, this is a way for the youth. In years past, the option really was for their kin to receive legal custody, and there's much less financial support available when you have custody of relatives. Very, very limited. So being served in a kinship foster care setting allows for that stipend while they're in foster care, and they may still return home to their biological
Sure.
parents. But if they don't, it paves the way also for adoption by that family, which is a much more permanent and stable ultimate setting,
Sure.
a way to end their time in foster care.
What's the difference in the licensing process? Not to get into the weeds,
Sure.
but how much simpler is the kinship licensing process to a traditional foster care model?
Sure. And like I discussed, the safety, nothing is waived about the safety requirements. When we're speaking of safety, just like a non-relative foster home has to have a fire inspection of their home and their background checks, kinship do as well. The things we could waive are a kinship family could be allowed to waive their pre-licensure training requirements and do those at a later time once the children are already there. Because as you can imagine, a lot of these families already have the children there, and then they're going to become licensed. So when you have your relatives there and you're providing care, being able to do your training a little bit later
Sure.
helps. We can modify the sleeping arrangements a little bit for standard foster care. There's some requirements for age of children who are opposite sex sharing a bedroom. As long as we've assessed that there's no safety risks to that, we can allow for that, which could assist with a relative that perhaps has a little bit of a smaller home, but
Right.
the siblings could remain together. And that's really probably the main things that are utilized
Sure.
for that tend to speed the process along and open the doors more to kinship licensure.
Before you go on to kind of the next area, I wanted to follow up on the economic services, which with a
Yes.
question you may not know.
Sure.
What percentage of South Carolinians are in the SNAP program?
I'm going to admit that I do not know that information right now, but I do know, like I was saying, the percent that were served by that did increase during the COVID pandemic, and that being their safety net helped greatly. But no, since I'm more on the child welfare realm, that's the statistics I'm
I would
familiar
assume
with.
that it's a lot rather than a little.
I would think so. I think that particularly the SNAP,
Yeah.
TANF, the overall welfare program is much more time limited, but SNAP can support a family for an indefinite period of time to increase their food stability.
And SNAP's, I'm going to see if I can remember it. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Yeah.
Right. And like I said, it used to be called food stamps. Some people call it EBT, which EBT is actually the card in which their monthly benefits come on. So you might hear it called any one of those three things.
Okay, other things that DSS does.
Yep. So also DSS is the entity, the agency which manages the licensing and regulatory for childcare providers, so daycare centers. And also DSS administers the South Carolina voucher program, which are commonly known as ABC vouchers, which assist low-income families with affording quality child care so their parents or relatives can work. And then also related to economic services, I would say, or financial stability of families, DSS also is the agency that manages child support services. So the Child Support Services Division with DSS provides administrative services to assist parents in obtaining child support from a non-custodial parent. And those services include establishing, modifying, and enforcing child support obligations, which even goes to the extent of establishing paternity when that may be a question, or locating parents who are absent but do have a child support obligation. It's no cost to families. I think that's probably something a lot of people may not be aware of, but it does also relate to the overall goal of DSS for strengthening families.
So does family court report to DSS?
No, family court is a separate overall entity, but the two agencies, obviously, DSS works extremely closely with the family court. The family court would be involved in foster care cases, in some.
I was thinking the child support piece.
Well, yes, absolutely. Those two do coincide, and really now for a non-custodial parent that is paying through family court, the DSS Child Support Enforcement Division is also concurrently monitoring that in case a parent got behind on their obligations. And then the other large program that DSS administers is the Adult Advocacy and Domestic Violence Prevention program. Adult advocacy is also commonly known as Adult Protective Services, or APS. That protects the health and welfare of the elderly, disabled, and vulnerable adults in South Carolina who are 18 or older and are victims of current abuse, potential abuse. They're being neglected or self-neglected or being exploited. And DSS also contracts with local shelters and community agencies throughout the state to prevent or reduce incidents of domestic violence, not just with vulnerable adults, but broadly.
So I'm going to jump into the philosophical for a minute because I think the APS conversation is fascinating.
Right.
So just a few weeks ago, we checked a gentleman into one of our shelters that's in his 80s.
Okay.
And I am shocked. I shouldn't be.
Right.
But I'm shocked that that exists, right? Like here's an individual who is getting a Social Security check. I think this particular individual says he has a payee.
Okay.
So somebody else is managing his money. And so that exists a lot in the shelter world, especially for, depending on how you want to define senior. Let's just say 65 and up that are getting a check in some way. How does Adult Protective Services or adult advocacy, that's got to be a common occurrence that is dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, so there's adults in poverty, just like there's children in poverty, but it doesn't always rise to the level necessarily that the adult would be considered a vulnerable adult, where they're no longer able to make decisions for themselves and are completely reliant on caregivers. So that's where programs like yours become a very, very, very important safety net for older adults, or any adult really, who may have some level of income through Social Security retirement benefits,
Right.
like that gentleman, or Social Security disability benefits.
Yep.
Those checks have a wide range of how much they are, and even receiving that check with the assistance of SNAP benefits due to life circumstances. A gentleman, older people may find themselves in that type of circumstance. Where DSS wouldn't necessarily need to be their custodian, which does occur in limited situations, but is not by any means the overall goal with that. The goal with the adult advocacy program would be doing things just like what has been done there. He may have self-referred or been referred from other
Right.
community resources, but that's also what the DSS Adult Advocacy Division would do, is help that person connect with other supports in the community so that they can be well cared for and not at risk of abuse or neglect. I did want to mention one thing before I forget, because I had made myself a little note, because I think it's important to always put it out there. If someone in the community suspects that a child or an adult is being neglected, I did want to share the hotline.
Please.
Because it's the
And
same.
we'll put it in the show notes
yeah,
too,
it's
Jocelyn.
it's the same hotline for reporting child abuse or neglect, or adult abuse or neglect. And the easiest way to remember it, we have a really great acronym for it, but it's 888-CARE, CARE, for us. Obviously you type out those on your on your phone, but 888-CARE for us.
Care the number for
Yes,
us.
CARE, the number. Yes, so that gets your 7 digits there. But yes, 888-CARE for us.
And if somebody is, people don't want to mess with other people's lives, so they're probably often hesitant to call that number. I would assume, I'm going to make an assumption, you'd correct it. I would assume that DSS's position would be, let's be safe rather than sorry. Make the call and let the professionals figure it out.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly the way to do it. And there is the ability to make an anonymous report if someone is just really concerned and doesn't want to identify themselves. That, of course, is a potential. But even when identifying themselves as the reporter, that is kept completely confidential. That is not able to be disclosed during the course of an investigation or a DSS case. But the intake hub is is the crew at DSS that's on the receiving end of the calls from the hotline, the intake hotline, and that is their exact job, is to screen. Some things will fall within the realm of abuse or neglect and be accepted by DSS to do an official investigation. There's also the ability, if there are clearly concerns that someone's reported, but the intake hub has the ability also to refer on to some community-based services, which are there not to investigate but to support.
Sure.
So there's a couple different pathways that that can go, but I agree completely with the good way you phrased that. Err on the side of letting the professionals that review those reports decide if that's going to be abuse or neglect.
Okay. Any other big buckets of DSS before we kind of dig deeper into the children's world?
That's the ones that from the general public that they're going to interface with the most. Internal at DSS, we also have our Office of General Counsel, which is our pool of attorneys that provide support for any type of case that may need to go to court or have some sort of legal support. We have our Office of the Inspector General, which is actually something that the general public may interface with. They actually are the entity which does like when someone works at a daycare center and has to have their their abuse and neglect database check. That's the Office of Inspector General. And then, of course, our constituent services division, which assists members of the public who have overall questions or concerns about DSS programs and services.
Okay, thank you. So let's walk the audience from identification of a child in need into DSS. Custody is not the right word, but maybe that is the right word. DSS custody to placement, and then how that interacts with Miracle Hill. So just kind of walk them through the whole process.
Sure.
What does it look like?
Right. So DSS begins working with the family. We talked about the intake hub, where the reports of suspected child abuse and neglect come from. That's generally going to be where the agency first becomes involved with the family, is when that report is made and accepted for investigation. DSS begins assessing the overall situation. Obviously, the goal is, if there are concerns of abuse or neglect, if there's not concerns of abuse or neglect, but the family needs some services, they have that same ability like the intake hub does to make referrals to community agencies to refer that family possibly to apply for SNAP or TANF, or refer them to other local resources. But if and even in that investigative phase, if a youth needs to be out of their parents' home temporarily, the agency will make or encourage the family to select a kin or fictive kin for that youth to temporarily reside with. During the investigative phase, there may be enough concern that that law enforcement might do an emergency protective custody action and the youth comes into DSS custody. The agency may have concerns and request that the case be presented to family court for a family court judge to make a determination if there is reason to remove to DSS custody. So those are the general mechanisms in which a youth would come into DSS custody: law enforcement removal, or DSS petitioning to present the case to family court, and the child's ordered into DSS custody that way. Even at that first point, if a child's in DSS legal custody, we have the ability to explore relatives. So if law enforcement has done an emergency removal of the youth to DSS custody, we are immediately going to begin assessing for kinship options and offering them licensure to serve the child that way. If a child or youth is unable to be served with a kinship resource once they've entered DSS custody, that is when we begin working with our partners, just like Miracle Hill, and our other extremely important child placing agencies, to make a non-kinship placement for that child or youth. So we have DSS foster families. We have our foster families that are licensed through Miracle Hill and our other child placing agencies. There are going to be times that a youth has special needs, mental health concerns, behavioral issues, where they need a higher level of foster care than a standard foster home. So we work with there are group care programs that are designed to serve youth with some treatment needs, and then also treatment foster homes, which are also through child placing agencies, but are trained to provide support to youth who have those higher level needs. And then while they're residing in their foster home or group home, that constant assessment for kin continues. We're always looking, can they be moved to a kinship setting?
So I got a bunch of follow-up questions.
Okay, sure.
So on a term that gets thrown around a lot is levels of foster care.
Oh, okay.
Right? And then you have different people that use different narrative language there.
Sure.
So will you talk group 1 or
Okay.
group 3 or
Sure.
therapeutic, or
Yeah.
just explain all that, and then
Sure,
maybe how the
sure.
child is determined which one to go
Okay,
into.
those are really great questions, and I agree. I think probably those are kind of thrown out there, and people are not really sure exactly what the differences are. So we have our standard foster homes, like Miracle Hill does not license therapeutic foster homes, although your foster homes are very skilled in managing those type of issues, even if the youth doesn't have that designation. So if we receive a child into our custody, or even once they're in custody and we begin getting to know them, if we're already, talking to that child's school, if they've been in therapy or receiving, medication services from a doctor or the local mental health center, we're requesting records. We're going to begin planning that, this youth is going to appear to need some sort of higher level of care. The way we assess for the different, which one of those therapeutic options would be the preferred setting is we have a division in our child welfare foster care programs called the Office of Child Health and Well-Being, which includes licensed clinical staff who are specifically trained to review the information about a child's diagnosis, behaviors, overall needs, special needs, and make a recommendation as to which type of setting would best serve the youth. Therapeutic foster homes, you mentioned the therapeutic 1, 2, 3. Those are assessments of to what level of behaviors does the youth have? Is this a youth who is unable to go to school due to extreme school problems, and a foster family would need to provide literally 24/7 care? Is this a youth that needs constant eyes on supervision at a much higher level than a typical youth that age? Or is this a youth that at this time is needing some extra support with therapeutic services, multiple doctor's appointments? So there's a spectrum,
Right.
and it's the same pool of families. It's just really identifying which in that pool at that time has those particular skills and abilities. So therapeutic 1, like I said, would be youth with treatment needs at a lower level compared to youth at the therapeutic foster care 3, which is the highest level of treatment needs for youth who can still reside in a family setting. For youth who have the treatment needs but are unable to reside in a therapeutic foster home, either due to their general behaviors at that time or just do not align with a family setting, or what we have a lot of times too is when there's just not a therapeutic foster home available, because we do have the overall capacity issues. So at those times we look amongst our pool of group care providers, and also, like you were discussing about levels of foster care, we also have levels of group
Right.
care. Group care 1 is a group care facility for youth that don't have the identified treatment needs, who are deemed, they would also be eligible generally to live in a regular foster home if one were available. So ever since we have been under our settlement agreement that started about 7 years ago, that required DSS to take a real laser focused look at making sure children were living in family-like settings. We at that time began focusing that any youth under the age of 12 was going to be in a foster home. So your group care now are generally serving 12 and up, mostly definitely teenagers and older teenagers. So we do have a lot of group care 1. Up until 3 years ago, Miracle Hill operated a truly excellent several group care 1 facilities. Group care 2 is sort of the kind of group home that serves youth with a moderate level of behavioral issues who do need some extra support for their treatment needs. Group care 3 is the type of group care which is set up to serve youth who have a higher level of treatment needs. They may need a lot more supervision. They may not be able to go to public schools, and their staff are trained to appropriately manage those type of youth and ensure they're getting treatment services. Group care is always designed to be a temporary thing, because all youth generally belong in families, and once they've received some services, the goal would be that they're either going to reside with kin or in a foster home setting.
So they're specialized foster care homes.
Correct.
And specialized group care facilities.
Correct.
For children based on their needs. Some behavioral, some organic disabilities.
Correct.
There's a variety to fill the needs out there. So you kind of alluded to it, but talk about the kind of the overall goals of DSS in this arena.
Yeah, I am just going to read you overall our mission statement. I thought it was a good summary of what DSS's overall goals for families are. I refer to this mission statement a lot. I keep it right by my desk. But the overall goals of DSS are to serve South Carolina by promoting safety, permanency, and well-being of children and vulnerable adults, helping individuals achieve stability and strengthening families. And this mission is accomplished through the core principles of competence, courage, and compassion. So it's really right there in the statement. The goal of DSS is for safety and permanency and well-being of children. So while they're in foster care with us, our goal is to make sure they're in the appropriate settings, that we have them receiving the appropriate types of services for their needs, which, like you said, some of these, it's not just behavioral or mental health. Some of these are organic things. Sure. You know, we have youth who have physical needs, medical needs. So while they're with us in foster care, it is our goal and priority that we're meeting all of those type of needs for them, while we're also looking at what can we do to ensure permanency. In foster care, we're not just working really hard with the children. Of course, laterally to that is a lot of work focused on their family, right. Their parents. What can we do to help remedy the conditions that led to the children needing to come into foster care? What can we do to ensure that their family of origin becomes a safe setting for them? So while we're making sure that they're safe and cared for in foster care, our foster care teams are working extremely closely with their families, making referrals, helping guide them as they are working on their family case plan. So that's our goal too, is permanency. Children deserve permanency. Children do not need to linger in limbo in foster care for years. That absolutely is not what we expect.
So I'm going to make a statement and then you can correct my statement. So if at all possible, keep the kid in the home.
Yes.
If you cannot keep the child in the home, then kinship or fictive would be the first preferred option.
Yes.
If you can't achieve kinship or fictive, then a traditional foster home would be a third option. And if that's not possible due to a variety of different reasons, then a group care. But all of it pointed hopefully towards reunification.
Correct.
And if that's not possible, permanency through adoption.
Adoption, you've got it. So those are the ways children exit to permanency. Reunification, adoption. It is still an option to return to custody of relatives who, for a variety of reasons, may not be interested in adoption. But those are some of the ways children can exit from DSS, is to permanency in one of those ways.
So I want to highlight a piece because I think it's missed in this conversation often. So if DSS gets called in to a family and you're doing an investigation and an assessment, can you talk just a little bit deeper about how you're supporting the family to try to maintain custody and how maybe emphasize how difficult a decision it is to pull a child.
Oh, absolutely. Because I didn't really mention what could come in between an investigation and foster care, because we do have, obviously, when we're assessing a family, that a case is indicated because there's been some level of abuse or neglect, but still the children can be served at home. So just like while a youth is in foster care and working, the family's working on a case plan, we have what we call family preservation within our child welfare system, which are caseworkers that work with children who are still residing with their parents or residing temporarily with relatives while their parents are working intently on their treatment services. So during that, the goal is also that the agency is helping the family connect with the services that they need. Do they need housing? Do they need substance abuse assessment or treatment? Do they need mental health treatment for unmet needs of that sort? So intently, the agency works with those families in that situation to prevent a need to removal to foster care. So a removal to foster care is always going to be the last option. The agency's goal is not just returning youth to family once they've entered DSS custody, heavily emphasis on preventative services, and that has become even more important, honestly, at a federal level. The efforts that are made to serve a youth in their family setting without ever having to enter foster care. And if you don't mind, I did want to kind of hit on some of the really new and effective things that we have with our community partners. Please. Okay, I did want to talk about that because as we have, and DSS has always focused on avoiding removal to foster care. We just haven't always had a ton of great tools for that, as in programs.
Sure.
So we have really gotten and expanded our service array that's available to provide services to families, either to prevent the removal to foster care or to support reunification for families with their children who may be in foster care. We have a lot of evidence-based programs that we engage with, really exciting things. We have a program called Parents as Teachers, which is a home visiting parent education program for new and expecting parents to promote positive child development and prevent maltreatment. We have family-centered treatment, which is a home-based trauma treatment, and it's for families who are at risk of their youth coming into foster care or who are in need of reunification from foster care. So we could refer a family to the family-centered treatment program, which is a home-based trauma program. In the upstate and Midlands, we engage with the Thompson Placement Stabilization Unit, which is a 24/7 program that can assist families, and it's a support unit for mentoring, coaching, counseling, and crisis intervention for youth who are in foster care and experiencing placement instability, and then also can work with the youth who is at the point of preparing to reunify with family. So, and then we also intensive in-home services, which is another in-home model that can offer services to stabilize a placement and support families in their homes through in-home counseling, behavior support. And then we have Healthy Families America, which is also a home visiting model for new and expectant families, similar to Parents as Teachers. And then Home Builders, which is an intensive in-home counseling and skill building supportive program for families who have children who are at imminent risk of out-of-home placement or who are in out-of-home placement and can't be reunified without intensive in-home. And then brief strategic family therapy, which is a structured family systems approach to treat families with children who display or at risk of developing problems, including substance abuse, conduct problems, and delinquency, which is really important, because I didn't touch on that a lot. But I think the public may have a perception of the children that DSS serves. The population is very young children, babies, young children, because they are the most vulnerable. But also we're a lot of times able to divert them to kin and also refer families to these services to prevent and support a family, to prevent removal to foster care. But what we do have a lot as well is a lot of youth entering foster care. They've become involved with the juvenile justice system. They're experiencing a lot of problems at school, and their families really would like to have their children home, but they just need support. The youth have gone down a path or experiencing behaviors that at that time the family just can't safely manage. So we're able to use things like the strategic family therapy to help educate a family and increase their ability to parent children, to parent their older children. In-home services are by far the most effective, and this array of evidence-based in-home services, we're really excited to have all these to additionally support our families who may be at risk of having their youth removed to foster care, or who do have their youth in foster care and we want to reunify.
And so some families with behaviorally challenged teens are self-identifying.
That's correct.
As having a need.
That's absolutely correct. And, as we know, there sometimes has been a lack of either access for families to seek mental health treatment for their children, or what they're able to seek independently is just not meeting the needs of that youth and being guided by some of these professionals who can come into their home and partner along with them. Very effective. But yes, you're absolutely correct. Some families are to the point of saying, I just don't know what else to do. I need help. I can't keep my child safe, which is a hard feeling, right?
So I'm going to ask you a couple numbers questions that you're going to know the answer to, because I say these things all the time, but it maybe is more powerful if you say them. So we would say that there's this huge need for teens and foster parents for teens and sibling groups. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, you've got it. So, like I said, people that aren't directly involved with the system do have, I think, a perception that foster care focuses on very young children. And indeed, we do. We have younger children in foster care, but you've got it. I mean, the missing link there is foster families for teens and for larger sibling groups. We do have it's a crisis with placement for our older youth, just due to varying dynamics, and I'll refer back to COVID again. A lot of our higher level teens with the higher level of behavioral needs would traditionally have been served in those treatment group care settings, just like in the general community. How the pandemic affected businesses with having enough staff to manage their businesses. Our group care facilities began having some trouble finding enough staff to run their programs, because that is hard work. Very, very, very hard work. So when they, when COVID happened and they had less access to finding staff to staff their programs and that continuing, a lot of them really had no option but to close their doors. Wonderful programs that just weren't able to sustain. So because there's less of those beds available to our youth with treatment needs, that is where we rely, and really always should have relied on foster families for those youth. Some of our teens and older youth, like we discussed, do have some levels of treatment needs and need the therapeutic type foster home, but a lot of them can and are served in regular foster home. I'm not going to ask you for a numbers question, but I know that y'all are serving quite a lot of teenagers in your Miracle Hill foster homes.
We're
too.
trying.
Yeah,
We're trying.
Y'all
We're
have always
beating the
done a great
drum.
job. Yes, and it is tough to because there's a lot of unknowns with that, and it may not be what a family really envisioned themselves doing when they went into fostering. But a lot of families do get into doing that because they just kind of take a chance. And, they see the need and think we're going to try it. And siblings is tough because a lot of our siblings, they don't just come in groups of 2 or 3. They come in groups of 4, 5, or 6. And, of course, families, a lot of families that are fostering, it's great. They have their own children that they're parenting, and it takes a family with a little bit of a larger home to work with a big sibling group. When you're doubling or tripling the amount of children in your home, that's double and triple the amount of doctor and dentist and other appointments. So it's tough. But again, with Miracle Hill and our child placing agencies, there are families that are doing it. Yep. There are families that have sibling groups of 4, 5, 6 in their home, and those are really special families. But we would encourage families that a lot of times a family may take on fostering is as their own children are getting older and moving on to their next steps in life, and perhaps they had a larger family themselves and now they have all these empty bedrooms. Those are sometimes great candidates to begin fostering and working with our sibling groups, and also those are great candidates to work with our teens. People who have experience parenting teens can do really well.
So I don't know that you know this story. I'll share a story because I think it's a good one. So we have a staff member, and he knew this need with sibling groups. So he and his siblings all got licensed. Okay, plus another couple in their church. So there was 4 couples, right? And they all decided to foster this sibling group of 4. They couldn't do 4 individually, but they worked together so that these kids would stay together. And then fast forward the story a couple years, and the birth parents got TPR'd. Right. And so now all these children are adopted. So they are brothers and sisters and first cousins. And it worked, right? Like it was an innovative way that they could make that work and serve these amazing kids.
Yeah, I love it. And I have seen that before. A lot of times that's when a church, I don't know if they all went to the same church or they were relatives or some combo, but we've seen that where a family will take on a sibling group because they know that, like you said, there's not one of them that can maintain all, but growing up, they'll still grow up together, right? And the different families that are fostering and going to adopt are the support system for the other foster families, right? Is built-in respite. So those are great things too. It's when families can wrap around a sibling group and be able to still maintain those lifelong connections.
So. 2 quick numbers, and this is the sales pitch moment. So the general average number of children in the quote system and the number of foster families that we need to serve every child. How many more foster families does DSS want across the state?
Ryan, you didn't ask me to bring my specific statistics.
General.
We generally have just a little bit under 4,000 youth in the foster care system. Right now, about 12% are being served in congregate care. Obviously, we'd still like that to be a lot less. The others are served in a combination of therapeutic foster homes, regular foster homes, and kinship. To be honest, I was looking at some statistics last week, and really to meet the goal of every two children to every one foster home. I mean, we need up there in every single community, like every county, like Greenville, for example, 200 to 300 additional foster homes, because the goal is not just that there's a foster home there, not just that if the average is 2 children per foster home, we wouldn't just want 2,000 foster homes because we have 4,000 children. We want options.
Right.
Because ideally, because every family can parent different types of dynamics. So we want options. So really, just in looking at those statistics, I mean, I think we're looking up there 500 to 700 different foster family homes that could serve all different dynamics of youth, so we can make matches in their home community.
Yeah.
Because that's important too, right? Is having children stay in their home communities, as well as doing that targeted matching for children and youth. So y'all focus on the upstate, right?
Yep.
So your listeners here can be assured that here, just in the upstate, like 500 additional foster families would be on the lower end of a goal.
And there's no county that's exempt, right? Like there's no spot where we don't have a need.
No, because even in some of our little smaller counties across the state that, might have 13 kids in foster care and they're having about 10 foster homes, you're still running the risk of those foster homes may not be able to serve those particular children.
Or may not be the right fit.
May not be the right fit, exactly. So we need options, because what we don't need is because of the availability on any given day, plug in some Greenville children in Charleston, because they ended up in a foster home, and it could be a great foster home, but they've had to leave everything they know. And reunification for youth involves frequent family visits. Families that visit with their children more frequently are more successful in reunification. It keeps them motivated. It keeps that bond. And obviously, when children are placed across the state, to get them to visits, as you can imagine, that's a lot of time in the car. That's a lot of resources. That's a lot of time that, those children may miss school. So we just really need an adequate pool in each area so our youth can stay close and have the right kind of home.
So I say this every time I get the opportunity to speak in a church. There are more churches in South Carolina than there are children in need.
That's right.
This is an easy solution, church. Hear me.
Mm-hmm.
If every church would just do one more,
Yeah.
your job would get a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we've been saying that for years, and our population of foster care youth hasn't drastically increased. The needs of the youth have to some extent, and the overall resources. So yes, I think that remains as true as ever, that if, a lot of churches do have, 20, 30 foster families there because they're a church, that's one of their missions. But if every other church could, sponsor a foster family within their church, and imagine the great things they could do.
Right.
One foster family in their church that's fostering, everybody else in that church could be their support system, could be pools for assisting them with babysitting, just doing that kind of wrap around. So that's I think that is a great way to think of it, is the whole church could be fostering that youth by supporting the foster family in the church.
Clearly, I believe the Bible points to that. That's a whole nother conversation.
Sure.
So you said 12% are still in group care, to use the common term. What percentage did you say were going into kinship or fictive?
Right now, we're at about 25%. And again, These are just
General
generalities
numbers,
because it
general
does
numbers.
change a lot. But we've moved into 20 to 25% of children in the foster care system
great.
are living with kinship, whether that's licensed kinship or they're in foster care, DSS custody, and living with relatives who haven't become licensed but are still able to be their placement resource.
Are there any other, you pointed to one inaccurate assumption. Are there any other assumptions or perceptions that people might have about DSS that you want to eradicate?
Well, and I think we did hit on what I think are the assumptions about the foster care population. One thing just in general, I think about DSS, and when I think of especially working for the agency, it's really tough, not just because the work is hard, but sometimes the public perception, the things that come to the attention of the media and the general community, right, or when things have gone wrong. But there are so many things on the flip side that have gone right.
Sure.
And case managers that are working really long hours and doing emotionally draining work to keep families and children safe and strong. So it always hurts my heart a little bit when you see something like that. But the public's not really, of course, able to see the flip side when everything went right.
So I think you emphasized it in reading the mission statement, but DSS is not the secret police. You guys are trying to the best of your ability, keep a child in their home and assist the family. Right? Like you don't take it lightly when a child has to leave, and you're doing everything within your power to stop that from happening. I think what I've learned just in our time here this morning is that this can be a resource for families who are struggling.
That's right.
They shouldn't be scared. They should reach out to this support mechanism that can infuse their family with help and therapy and all this good stuff to make them more successful parents.
That's right. We're clearly, since we talked about the vast crisis with placements for youth, we're not seeking to increase our foster care population. That is not our goal. We're not out there looking for putting more youth in foster care for a variety of reasons. I do think that's a myth that DSS is, that the goal is to find something and look for any reason to remove the youth to foster care. It could not be more far from the opposite, like we talked about. I think the general public probably has no ideas about all these services that are being provided to families and youth,
Man, I hate to keep asking you these numbers questions,
Oh, you're
but
fine.
they're coming up. So if 100 investigations start, how many result in the child staying at home, and how many ultimately result in the child going into DSS custody? Generally.
Oh, goodness. Especially since investigations in DSS is not my realm. I'm going to, and I could be way off, but I'm
you can
going
email
to,
us back, and
we'll
put the right
you're
answer.
going to put the right answer in there. But I am going to say very few, because a lot of families that DSS touches, the investigation's unfounded. There was never abuse or neglect at all. Other times, the investigation might be indicated that the family needs services, and the children are served through the family preservation model. Very few in the scheme of things youth are entering foster care, right? And you asked me earlier about the percentage of youth. You asked me earlier about the percentage of people who were receiving like economic services for the agency. And I did remember that DSS touches, in some extent, 1 in every 6 South Carolinians. Right.
Wow.
1 in 6 is receiving assistance from some program, not just the child welfare, but all of the programs. So if DSS is touching 1 in 6 people in South Carolina, we're by far serving far less foster care youth.
Yeah.
So I think that
absolutely.
helps to remember that DSS is here to support families. And the vast majority of what we're doing is supporting families without their children being in our custody.
So if a listener is hearing you and hearing some of these other episodes and they feel the gentle prodding to perhaps consider foster care, what would you say to them?
I think definitely, if someone knows, a lot of people, when they think of fostering or hear of it, they're like, I do have a friend that does that, or I have someone, I think my cousin adopted through DSS. I think it's a great way to ask, if you know someone that's fostering, ask them about their experience, hear what that's been like for them. And then also reaching out. We have obviously people, I'm sure, come directly to Miracle Hill that are interested in fostering. But to hear more about all the different types of fostering, Heartfelt Calling is DSS's intake partner. That's sort of a clearinghouse for people who are interested in getting started but don't really know how to do that. They can explain the different types of licensing agencies available, the difference between therapeutic fostering and regular fostering. So they're a wealth of information too. But there's different ways to ease into fostering. We would welcome families even that would just like to provide respite.
What is respite?
Respite is when a foster family provides temporary relief for another family. The vast majority of our foster families, include their foster children in every single thing that they're doing as a family. But there's going to be times that a family has an emergency and needs to leave the state, for example, and their foster children just need to stay here. So a respite family is able to provide temporary foster care and can really partner with a foster family to do some of that babysitting. So that a foster family can do self-care. So that's a great way to ease into it. It's exactly the same requirements as standard fostering, but it's a way to decide, I think I'll just keep doing respite, or this has felt pretty good. I think I'd like to dip my toe into full-time fostering. We also have a lot of youth, due to our placement crisis. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but a lot of our teens who are without placement spend a significant amount of time sitting in our DSS offices. They're sleeping in different foster homes every night. A lot of our foster families, absolutely wonderful, but just aren't equipped to provide full-time foster care for a youth, an older youth with behavioral concerns. So families even that could see themselves hosting a more complex or older youth for overnights or the weekends. Ideally, children have, long-term placements, but when they don't, we rely on some truly excellent foster families who are opening their home as much as they can, but of course they get tired and they also could use a break, so expanding that. So I like the idea of coming into it thinking, I'm going to start with doing some things temporarily and see how that feels.
That grieves my heart.
Yes.
That some child is bouncing from house to house every day. Like, how are they're not focused on their education, right? When they have no clue where they're going to lay their head at night. That's
exactly right. And that's, one of your questions for me here was, what breaks your heart the most about it? And it's those youth that, that we, with all of everybody in the agencies, best intentions. We are spending so much time trying to make a plan for these youth, but we just can't seem to find that stability. You're absolutely correct. They're not able to. It's difficult to enroll them in school when they're sleeping somewhere different each night, could be anywhere in the state, and then coming back to their DSS office during the day. The school systems have been working with us very well. In years past, you would really never see a school enrolling a youth with their DSS county office as their home.
Right.
But we have youth that are at the offices so frequently that the school systems will allow us to enroll them in school. So at least instead of being at the DSS office, they're in school.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always work out, of course. So they're missing out on that. It's difficult for them to receive the appropriate kind of therapy services when they're not reliably in the same place every day or don't have a foster family to be consistently involved with that. It's very damaging to the youth, and for all of us in the foster care realm or child protective services, we see that, and it is just really heartbreaking and not okay for our youth. So
And not okay.
it's not okay. It's not okay
Yeah.
for our youth. It's not okay for our caseworkers to see that, with all their best intentions, that we just can't find that fit. So, I think it would be a great time for families, again, even that don't see themselves able to do that full time. A family that can have a child in their home for a week can do so much.
Yeah.
Even just that little brief period of time where the youth can take a breather and sort of, recollect themselves and see that someone cares, even if they're not able to be there full time. That's immensely beneficial to the youth. And a lot of times those families they'll still be connections. And if a youth is between foster homes, would be their go-to to host them. And that's sort of the way a lot of the families present it, that they're hosting that's that child is an honored guest in their home, even temporarily. Yeah.
So I hear you, a night or a week, but listeners, we can do better.
Right.
Than
That is
right.
the
Like
bare minimum.
We shouldn't be even happy
Shouldn't be
about
even,
that.
No, and it is sad that that's why we celebrate those actual wins so much at DSS in the foster care and placement realm. When we finally get there, we finally find that right fit foster home who has stepped up to work with that child, because you're right, it's not okay. Youth
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing this, and they should be in long-term placements. But like you said, if a family's considering it, that at least is a way to even temporarily help, and then maybe it'll
And
feel
it does
good.
help,
And it does,
even though we don't like it.
It does. And what we do have is we have foster families that have been providing emergency foster care. They never saw themselves as a teen foster home, but they bonded.
Yeah.
And DSS was able to wrap that family and child in services and support, and those have become long-term placements. So that's one of those successes we see as well.
It's almost like foster care speed dating.
Yes.
Right? But sometimes it works.
True.
Right?
True. That is very true.
Okay, last question for you, and you've been so gracious. What would you hope that our listeners would walk away with after hearing this episode?
Yeah, so I would love for people to come away considering fostering, but if nothing else, I would like families to come away from this with the ability to tell others. I listened to this podcast, and did you know that this is going on? And, your children are getting older and you have this big house. Have you thought about fostering? So love for families to consider stepping up and fostering, but if not, use this general awareness gained to sort of spread the message that our children in South Carolina need help.
Well, Jocelyn, thank you for coming on. Thank you from Miracle Hill to DSS. Thank you for the partnership. We can't do what we do without you guys. We are grateful for the partnership. We would agree with all of your goals, right? We want the best for the kid. So I'm going to close this in prayer, and I'm going to pray for those individuals who may be considering DSS in the future.
That sounds
Let's
great.
do that. Father, we love you, Lord. We thank you for today, for waking us up, giving us another opportunity to serve you. Father, I do believe that there is somebody listening to this episode that, maybe is trying to avoid the fact that you're calling them to consider foster care. Father, I would pray that you would give them the boldness to explore the idea, not commit, but maybe guide them to people that they can talk to who have the experience. Send them into a relationship with Miracle Hill or DSS or some other CPA that can tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly about foster care, so they have a very real idea about what they're committing to. And then when appropriate, give them the courage they need to make that decision. We love you. We trust you. Thank you for our partnership with DSS. Thank you for the amazing men and women that you've called into that agency to come alongside and assist the children in the state of South Carolina. We love you and we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all's partnership as well.
Goodbye, everybody.